I'd like to begin tonight with one of my favorite teaching stories, one that's kind of imprinted itself some, and it's a lovely Hasidic story about a Rabbi Zusa, and he's on his deathbed, and his disciples surrounded him, and he's weeping, and they're trying to figure out why he's so upset. They're all perplexed. And so they asked him why he's weeping, and one of them ventured to say, surely if anyone is assured a place in the kingdom of heaven, it's you. And the sage turned his head to his beloved students and said softly this. He said, if my children, when I stand before the heavenly court, I'm asked, Zusa, why are you not Moses? I shall have no hesitation in affirming I was not born a Moses. If they ask me, why then are you not an Elijah? I'll speak with confidence. Neither am I an Elijah. I weep, friends, because there's only one question I fear to be asked. Why were you not Zusa? So there's power to this teaching, and it's something that we can each intuit in our own lives, that we in some way leave home, we in some way disconnect from some natural beingness, from what is unique within us, from our full aliveness. And we end up confining ourselves to a smaller sense of what we are. And in a way, you can think of it that we incarnate, and very quickly, between our culture and our caregivers, we're given messages about who we are and really who we need to be accepted and loved and successful in this world here. And then we internalize that. So rather than paying attention to what's right here, our passions, our fears, our longings, our aliveness, our creativity, we're focused on these standards that we think we need to meet all the time, how we should be thinking or feeling or acting. And it takes us away from home. So the way of moving from our self-story, the narrative that confines us, and usually that narrative has built into it a lot of messages of how something's wrong with us, and we really need to be different. And with those messages, there's a felt sense of fear and anxiety. How to move from that collection of self-story into a sense of living from essence is really the exploration. How to wake up from who we thought we were and who we're not, and really live from the aliveness that's here. So the question is really, what stopped Zusa? He's a wise, pious guy. What stopped him from being himself? And I've named a bit of it. Our deepest longing is to belong. And this is something that's very much rooted in our biology and in our brains and nervous systems. The most recently developed part of our brain is, and it's what has allowed us to flourish as humans, has us geared for connection. It has us wanting to connect, wanting to attach successfully. So there are different ways that happens. We have a spiritual potential out of that longing to belong, to really experience a oneness with aliveness, a oneness with heart, a oneness with all beings. In other words, it can be absolutely all-encompassing, that belonging. That's the spiritual expression of what's possible. But the ego, out of fear, confines it to, I want to belong to my closest circle of whatever, those that can affirm me and make me secure, and I have to do this, this, and this to belong. So what I want to explore tonight, I want to contrast the egoic approach to belonging, the one that most of us get caught in at least some of the time, the ways we try to be good, the ways we try to feel good about ourselves. And that's the key, that we often try to feel good about ourselves, and contrast that to really feeling our basic goodness. Can you sense the difference between those two? On the egoic level, we're trying to be, it's our good-personhood project. We're trying to be the person that will get the acceptance and get the love. And when we start waking up and realize it doesn't really deliver, it doesn't work, it's not very secure, we start turning towards a kind of presence that lets us discover a goodness that is really the grounds of all belonging. We start trusting who we are. So we'll explore that. We'll kind of juxtapose it, and this is not about getting rid of all our ego approaches to feeling good, but it's about sensing where the limitations are. So most of us, if we're honest, can scan the day and find out how many moments in some way we're doing things to feel better about ourselves. Or how many times we're doing things to not feel bad about ourselves. We can kind of check that out, that's kind of a layer in there. Now, when we manage to feel good about ourselves, it lasts a few seconds, or maybe a few weeks, but not usually. It's short, because we have to keep refueling the good about self kind of machine. When we begin to touch, oh, there's a basic goodness here in this presence itself, that becomes the grounds of lasting freedom. So this is the kind of two different levels. The ego level of feeling good about ourselves has a valuation, and it's based on a narrative. The more spiritual version of belonging, and the word spiritual I'm not crazy for, but the transpersonal, the non-egoic, isn't based on a narrative, it's based on being. It's based on a timeless presence that we're trusting in. Here's a way to bring this home a little more. Here's an inquiry. You can just close your eyes for a moment and just ask yourself these questions. First question is, if you kind of scan right now and today or this week, what is between me and feeling good about myself? What's going on that's between me and really feeling good about myself? And just notice what comes up. Notice if there's a lurking story about being an inattentive parent, or maybe you didn't exercise enough, or you ate wrong. Or maybe you're not feeling good about yourself because you were really judgmental with your partner, or you're not coming through the way you want to at work. But just sense, what is it? What's between me and feeling good about myself? And see if you can sense how what you land on is the domain of narrative. It's about the story of your life. It's about your doing self. Let's change the question. Now ask yourself, what's between me and feeling my basic goodness right now? And if you don't like the word basic goodness, feeling my natural presence. Feeling the spirit, our heart that's here. What's between me and feeling my basic goodness, spirit, presence? What do you find? Maybe you notice there's kind of a clench in the heart, there's some fear in your body. Maybe you notice there's just a distracted mind and you can't land anywhere. But what you might notice is that when you ask that question, what's between me and feeling this natural presence, my deep beingness, natural goodness, that the question actually brings more presence to bear. You actually start noticing what's happening in the moment. That presence is the portal. That's the beginning of belonging to the life that's right here. So when you compare these two questions, you might sense for yourself as you move through your day, what is your filter? Is your filter, how am I doing now? Am I doing it right? Do I feel good about myself? Am I meeting the criteria for good personhood? Or is your inquiry, what's really between me and real presence? Trusting my goodness in this moment. The Buddha taught that to whatever the mind pays attention to, that will be the inclination of our awareness. Okay, you can open your eyes. Now, the more fear in our system, in other words, the more there was early wounding, the more there was poor attachment with caregivers, the more we have a kind of genetic propensity towards fear, the more we're going to be hitched to the fear of not being good and the craving to feel better about ourselves. In other words, that's going to become an area that's really charged, the more fear that's there. And there's a good reason. Because if we don't feel we're good, we won't be included. We won't belong to the tribe. Does that make sense? Why it matters so much to feel good about ourselves? If we don't feel like we're good, we won't feel like we belong. You know, it's interesting, the word good derives from the Indo-European word that its root is gather and together. So feeling good has to do with feeling belonging. Okay. But how do we go about it? We try to belong by setting standards versus belonging to the moment. And that's what gets us in trouble. And even when we're not meeting our standards, even when we're really flunking the test, so to speak, still feeling good about ourselves matters. There's a story I love that Sylvia Boorstein tells about a man named Phil, a Buddhist practitioner in New York, who was described being mugged at gunpoint. And he had worked on the loving kindness practice for a while, and so this evening on a small side street in Soho, a disheveled man with a scraggly beard, dirty blonde hair, accosted him and demanded money. And so Phil gave over $600 that he carried in his wallet. The mugger shook his gun and demanded more. Stalling for time, Phil handed him his credit cards and the whole wallet. Looking dazed and high on some drug, the mugger said, "I'm going to shoot you." Phil responded, "No, wait, here's my watch. It's an expensive one." Disoriented, the mugger took the watch, waved the gun, and said again, "I'm going to shoot you." Somehow Phil managed to look at him with loving kindness. He said, "Look, you don't have to shoot me. You did really good. Look, you got several $100s. You got credit cards and an expensive watch. You don't have to shoot me. You did good." The mugger, confused, lowered the gun slowly. "I did good?" he half-asked. "You did really good. Go and tell your friends you did good." Dazed, the mugger wandered off, saying softly to himself, "I did good. I did good." Well, I love that story. The poignancy for me is how deep in us, no matter what is going on, no matter how our lives have gotten contorted and tangled, how deeply we want to feel good about ourselves. Even deeper than that, we want to trust our basic goodness. We don't want to feel good about a story of a self. But we don't usually get that deep because we're so busy trying to meet those standards. But still, it matters to us. So then it becomes important, if we want to drop into a deeper level of that trust in basic goodness, it becomes really important to start looking at how in our daily life we go about kind of in this trance of, I want to feel good about myself, and doing all these things to feel good about ourselves. And I want to say right now that some of the things we do to feel good about ourselves are actually skillful things. They're helpful. They're helpful to our lives. The point is to be mindful of it. Because if we're doing it mindlessly, it still reinforces a sense of a self that's not good enough and needs to feel better. Does that make sense? So just be mindful of it. And I'll give you examples of wholesome ways we try to feel good about ourselves. We do try to be virtuous sometimes in the way we eat or the way we exercise. And even more so, we have a moral code because it's part of our evolutionary equipment to share a moral code, and we try to go along with it. And that morality tells us to be as honest as we can and to be considerate to other people, to not cause harm. It teaches us to not take what's not ours, to not take undue credit when it's not ours, to really be respectful. So going along with that code is wholesome. But if all we're doing is following the rules to try to feel good about ourselves, it won't work. That's the point. Okay? There are also ways that are not skillful, and those are the ones I want to just take some time and just unpack some. And one of the most basic ways we try to feel better about ourselves, one of the most basic strategies of our good-personhood project, is to judge and punish ourselves. It's well-intended. It really is. I mean, you can take anything we're doing and find a positive intention. We're trying to strong-arm ourselves into being a better person. And then we have these emotions that support that, like guilt and shame, that are trying to remind us of how to navigate, but because we are so caught up in them, they actually further strengthen the trance of not okay. So we punish ourselves, we blame ourselves, we're harsh and cruel to ourselves. In one story, a man was given a parrot who had a really, really bad attitude and a worse vocabulary. I mean, he cursed and it was foul. So he tried to change the bird's attitude. He tried loving kindness, and he thought, oh, this parrot had a bad childhood, whatever, But it didn't work. I mean, the parrot was really, really rude. So finally, in a moment of desperation, he put the parrot in the freezer. And there was all this squawking and flapping and screaming and so on. Then all of a sudden, whew, dead quiet. And of course, the man got frightened that he might have actually hurt the bird, so he quickly opened the door. At which point the parrot calmly stepped into his extended arm and said this: "I'm so sorry that I offended you with my language and actions. I ask your forgiveness. I will try to check my behavior." He was astonished at the bird's change in attitude, but then the bird continued and said, "May I ask what the chicken did?" So the problem with punishment is that initially or overtly it seems like it works, and we know that inside what happens. And even though it's a fun example, what happens when parents with children are very punishing? What happens? Well, we know that what happens is that somehow or other the child behaves in a way and is cut off from that what he was told or she was told was wrong, cut off also from passion, from longing, from creativity, from aliveness. Punishment cuts us off from our life energy. It gets torqued. Of course, it comes out in other ways. So it cuts us off, and not only that, not only does it cut off our belonging to life, really, it's the opposite of what we wanted, it also locks us into an aversive relationship with ourselves. Again, Neurons that fire together wire together. The more times you send critical judgments to yourself, the more locked you are in the narrative and feeling of, I'm bad. So we lock in the trance. We further sever ourselves from belonging. Okay, that's the first big way. The second big way that we try to feel good about ourselves is inflation. Rather than deflation, putting ourselves down, we inflate ourselves and we try to tell ourselves stories of how we're better or special, that we're more intelligent than most everybody else around us. And it includes a kind of put down to others, but we fuel our special person kind of sensibility. It happens a lot with bragging or with exaggeration, within some way of kind of presenting what we want other people to see, which of course has a kind of contrived quality and cuts off spontaneity. There's a story that took place in the backwoods of Virginia, supposedly. A guy's driving around, sees a sign saying talking dog for sale. So the owner appears and says, the dog's in the backyard, go check him out if you want him. So the guy goes into the backyard and sees a nice looking Labrador retriever sitting there. You talk, he asks. Yep, the lab replies. After he recovers from the shock of hearing a dog talk, he says, so what's your story? The lab says, well, I discovered I could talk when I was pretty young. I went to help the government, so I told the CIA, and in no time at all they had me jetting country to country, sitting in rooms with spies and world leaders, because no one figured a dog would be eavesdropping. I was one of their most valuable spies for 8 years running, but the jetting around really tired me out. I knew I wasn't getting any younger, so I decided to settle down. I signed up for a job at the airport to do some undercover security, wandering near suspicious characters, listening in. I uncovered some incredible dealings and was awarded a batch of medals. Got married, had a mess of puppies. Now I'm just retired. Guy's amazed. He goes back in and asks the owner what he wants for the dog. $10. $10? This dog's amazing. Why on earth are you selling him so cheap? Because he's a liar. He never did any of that shit. So we present a self that we want to be admired, that we want to, help us get through the door, and it really makes sure we're a member, that we belong. And a lot of the ways we do it are exaggeration and little white lies, and it's very interesting to track it. Just to watch yourself for a week, knowing you're just going to watch and see how many times in some way you're trying to present a self that looks good, very on purpose. Because what happens when we do that? Well, underneath inflation and that presentation is a deep sense that we need to do that because we're lacking. So again, the more we practice it, the more we reinforce a deep sense of something's wrong. Underneath inflation is a sense of emptiness or hollowness. So we cut off, and not only that, when we go around and there's kind of bragging and exaggerating, we actually have an aversion to our own narcissism. That's an undercurrent. We don't like the fact we're doing it. So again, that trance of unworthiness, of not being okay. Okay, the next way we try to feel good about ourselves, and this one we're all familiar with probably, is that we strive to do more, to be more, to achieve more, to help more. In other words, a lot of the things we do are, it's kind of a dutiful or ambitious or trying to in some way feel better about ourselves. And the more we get done, it's very tempting and seductive, because when we check things off the list, we do feel better about ourselves, right? For a little bit. And we know how long that lasts. We know that's really, really soon before you start realizing you have something else to check off. But what happens is that we get hooked on it. And the more we're hooked on kind of doing things, the more we are cut off from the present moment, from the aliveness that's here, from the tender-heartedness and open-heartedness that's here, from the creativity and wonder that's here. In other words, we're not belonging to the life we love because we're trying so hard to get things done so we'll belong. Catch-22. Part of what's very sad about that, all our doings, especially our doings that are helpful to other people, is that we don't trust our motives. In other words, sometimes I do a workshop and I'll include in it this sharing of random acts of kindness we've done, just to name some of the kindnesses that we've done in our lives. And people will share different kind things they've done. But many people report that even when they share it and name it, there's a part of them that feels like, well, I just did that because I wanted to feel good about myself. Or I just did that because I wanted... In other words, there's some self-aggrandizing in the act of helping. We don't feel we're pure. And so this whole domain of doing good to feel good about ourselves needs mindfulness. It doesn't mean we stop doing good. This is not like saying, oh, cut out all the acts of kindness. Just be mindful so that we don't get trapped in some sense of we're doing it to up-level our goodness quotient. Okay. Last one I want to name of the ways that we try to feel good about ourselves is really it's really fear-based, which is that we in some way conform and go ahead and be the person that other people tell us we should be, and don't take risks, and don't experiment, and don't follow our bliss. We just don't take a chance. And that's where we have this unlived life that becomes so painful, especially if we feel like we're at the end of our life, or we look back and realize we really did not live true to ourselves. There's a brief essay I want to read to you that I love that, to me, really illustrates this. And this is written by Bruce Holland Rogers. When he was very young, he waved his arms, gnashed the teeth of his massive jaws, and tromped around the house so that dishes trembled in the china cabinet. "Oh, for goodness sake," his mother said, "you're not a dinosaur, you're a human being." Since he was not a dinosaur, he thought for a time he might be a pirate. "Seriously," his father said at some point, "what do you want to be? A fireman then? Or a policeman? Or a soldier? Some kind of hero?" But in high school, they gave him tests and told him he was very good with numbers. Perhaps he'd want to be a math teacher. That was respectable. Or a tax accountant. He could make a lot of money doing that. It seemed a good idea to make money, what with falling in love and thinking about raising a family. So he was a tax accountant, even though he sometimes regretted that it made him, well, small. And he felt even smaller when he was no longer a tax accountant, but a retired tax accountant. Still worse, a retired tax accountant who forgot things. He forgot to take the garbage to the curb, forgot to take his pill, forgot to turn his hearing aid back on. Every day it seemed he had forgotten more things, important things, like which of his children lived in San Francisco and which of his children were married or divorced. Then one day, when he was out for a walk by the lake, he forgot what his mother had told him. He forgot that he was not a dinosaur. He stood blinking his dinosaur eyes in the bright sunlight, feeling the familiar warmth on his dinosaur skin, watching dragonflies flitting among the horsetails at the water's edge. So there can be a wholesome kind of sorrow that comes when we realize we left home. It wasn't our fault. There's huge, huge conditioning from our society and from the places of unmet needs in our own heart and body, a huge conditioning to contract and just do the best we can to belong. Huge conditioning. So we take on the strategies we take on to feel good about ourselves and forget the pathway into just trusting the goodness that's already here. Just like that story with Zusa, in some way he became this wise and pious rabbi, and there was tremendous consciousness in that, and yet still, he was still going along with some role that didn't allow him access to his fullness of being. And he knew that. And then this young boy who had some passion to feel his primordial nature, and got pulled away from it. So we can feel a mix of sadness and longing sometimes when we sense that there's this unlimited reserve within us of love and presence and creativity and aliveness. And we're in the habit of turning the attention and fixating outward on how to get through the day, how to be a good person, how to not be a bad person. And the potential here, is to become mindful of that, the ways we've become small, and then choose the presence that brings us back home.